Hello, I'm Gordon Brown, and this is greeneconomy.tv. Welcome to the Circular Economy Show. This week, we're chatting about electronic waste at the national scale, at the international scale, certainly at the African scale, Pan-African scale. And to discuss that with me today, we have our resident expert on circular economy, Chris Whyte, director of the African Circular Economy Network, and special guest today, founder of organization Closing the Loop, Joost de Kluijver, joining us. Before we get started, let's tune into a quick video to understand the context for today's conversation. Thank you.
More than 2 billion phones are produced every year. Only 5 factories can recycle those they replace, but none of these are in Africa. For a continent with an explosive growth of the mobile industry, this creates a serious problem. Millions of phones become obsolete with no way to recycle them. Closing the Loop empowers local partners to actively participate in the value chain. We buy scrap phones and ship them to Europe for proper recycling. Not only does this prevent environmental damage, but it fills a gap in the circular economy, which is about bringing resources back into the value chain instead of to the landfill. We are currently active in more than 10 African countries, from Guinea to Ghana, from Cameroon to Zambia, and we are actively expanding in the region. We support our local partners to help them grow their business and expand their business expertise. With a growing number of partners, we've now collected over 1 million scrap phones, and we've enabled over 2,000 people to financially benefit. Something to celebrate. For example, in Cameroon, our partner achieved a great milestone. But this is just the beginning. We have a long way to go before phones become truly circular. With your help and the help of governments, the public and companies, we can work towards a world we all believe in, a world where waste is not wasted.
Right, so welcome indeed to Joost and to Chris. Chris, I'd like to hand over to you to give us a bit more context today, to today's conversation, also to bring Joost in to talk about some of the really practical stuff that his organization, Closing the Loop, is doing. So over to you, Chris.
Great, thank you, and always great to be back, and welcome to viewers, listeners, and those who are streaming afterwards. So we tried to follow this approach of looking at a particular waste stream in a local, a national, and an international basis. And we've had some really interesting discussions over the last couple of weeks. So at the local level, we're talking about, for example, the Western Cape producing some 40,000 metric tons of electronic waste per year. And we spoke to Malcolm Whitehouse from AST Recycling looking at the local issues. We then moved to the national issues, and we spoke about 360,000 tons in South Africa. Only 12% of that's recycled. And we had the amazing Suzanne Karcher from the WWRF 3 program discussing that with us. But when we look at this project or this issue, the problem in a bigger context, in Africa, we're looking at somewhere around 2 million metric tons of electronic waste on an annual basis. And globally, we're in the region of 53.6 million metric tons. Those are the stats from last year. We know that this is increasing by some 4 to 5% every year. So we're looking at potentially some $57 billion worth of resources that are locked up in this electronic waste, and the opportunity to try and find ways of doing that. Our levels of recycling are pretty poor. In South Africa, we're talking probably in the region of 10 to 12%. In Africa, probably as low as 4%. And internationally, I think we're at about 19 to 20%. So we've got a long way to go, and there are massive opportunities. So to bring this into the global context, we have Joost de Kluijver with us, and from Closing the Loop. Thank you very much again for being with us. He has mentioned that the video is a little bit old. So just to catch up and see where we are in terms of what Closing the Loop is doing and the opportunities from a global, African global perspective that we can look at. Joost, welcome to the show. Thank you for taking the time.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here.
So, Joost, what I'd like to find out from you is, yes, this is a slightly older phone. I've been in discussions with yourself and members of Closing the Loop to look at opportunities across Africa. There are many, many opportunities, and as you say, we've got to look at the realistic applications on the ground that make commercial sense. So we need to drive these projects from the perspective of what makes economic sense. And circular economy is largely about that. We've got to retain those resources. We've got to get them back into circulation. Maybe give us just an outline as to where Closing the Loop is now, 2021, and then perhaps just a little look forward. What's the goals for the next 5 years?
Yeah, cheers. So indeed, as you saw, the video was recorded in the 70s. That was the reason why I had that hair at the time. But currently, we've developed quite a bit. And I think the biggest step that we made is that we went from the situation which you, I think to some extent, just saw also in the video, looking at e-waste as a problem, a challenge, a responsibility, towards how to make the topic of global e-waste reduction, and of course specifically focused on African countries, how to make that commercially appealing. And I think you already mentioned to some extent there is a logical business case. There is electronic waste that contains materials. So if you recycle that, then there's value. But unfortunately, it's also quite clear that that's not a big business case that's strong enough, right? Otherwise, there wouldn't be an e-waste problem. So what we did is that we tried to find out how can we make a topic that is quite distant, at least for people for example, here in Europe, the topic of e-waste in emerging markets. That's also quite abstract, right? Global e-waste, and then you hear indeed the numbers, 53 million, etc. How do you make those big, difficult to grasp, and also just not really sexy topics interesting for commercial people? That's really the goal that we set out some 5 years ago. And the approach that we took is by making the devices that people buy here in Europe or in the US or in Australia, where some of our customers are, to make their devices waste neutral. So Closing Loop is now a circular service provider, which offers a service that is known as waste compensation. And it very simply boils down to, if you buy a new phone, so the device that you like and through the supplier that you prefer, you can make that device waste neutral by funding the recycling and collection of an equal amount of electronic waste. So you just buy the device that you want, but at the same time, a similar amount of electronic waste is collected and recycled. And then that waste reduction is used to compensate your purchase. It makes the device that you've bought waste neutral. So very simple, very straightforward, but then still the main question is, why would you want to pay for that? And I think the biggest thing that we've learned is no one is against sustainability, even in the tech industry. But as soon as sustainability means, or circularity means, that you have to suffer for it, and unfortunately, most of the time it means suffering, right? Really expensive, you cannot buy the product that you want, or you have to change your procurement process if you're a business, then people would say, well, yeah, maybe next time. So our service is by no means, a solution that creates global circularity or anything. It allows that mass, 99% of consumers and businesses that are saying, sure, something green, something circular, I'd be happy to use that. If it is indeed simple and appealing, it serves them. So we get them started on that really long journey. And we of course need to be honest about that as well. A really long journey towards circular tech. But we think that it's really great to combine a vision with also practical results. And our practical results are still then what we do in the video, which is electronic waste collection. But now we created a business model that can fund that collection and recycling. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. I think that the opportunity in terms of the understanding the value of the waste is paramount. So Africa is really probably one of the most circular continents. And if you take that into something like cell phones, a cell phone doesn't have one life in Africa. It'll be passed down and fixed and refurbished many, many times until it's absolutely dead. So the opportunity in terms of then taking it to the next stage, where we need to understand the problems of dealing with electronic waste, the problematic fractions, the hazardous fractions, and making sure that we put in systems that look at appropriate and compliant management and recycling of these components. The opportunity, as we saw in the video with Nigeria, shows that there wasn't much in the way of local processing capabilities, but closing the loop is also looking at opportunities in terms of localizing the value add and trying to address opportunities in terms of recycling localization that allows one to look at keeping the value closer to home. Perhaps you could expand on some of the initiatives that you're looking at there?
Yeah, definitely. I think local recycling makes sense. I think circularity to some extent is all about that. Making sure that you close a loop as close to home as possible. But I mentioned also in the video, currently proper recycling of electronic waste is not facilitated in the continent. So you could build a plant and then say, well, we're done. But what we found out already, I think some 10 years ago, is the reason why there isn't a plant that processes this type of waste safely and responsibly is because the whole ecosystem is missing, right? You don't have legislation, you don't have consumer awareness, you don't have a business model, you don't have infrastructure, you don't have anything. So yes, you can build a plant, but if there's no waste coming into the plant, or if the waste is there, but the plant isn't making money, probably it's not a really great strategic long-term solution to build such a plant. So we felt that the first, at least 2 steps that you need to take is to create collection networks and to make them, as professional as you can, as safe as you can, but of course taking into account the local context. So you cannot just expect European type of collection happening in a country like Ghana or Nigeria. So that's one. And secondly, indeed, fund that type of collection because that type of collection will need to compete with the current collection that's happening in emerging markets, and that is illegal recycling. And they don't have any costs. They just have a price that they pay for the waste and then burn or in other ways extract materials without any precautions. So if you want to build local recycling capacity, you need to make sure that waste is coming in. So I'm really proud of my co-founder that has built collection networks in several African countries, working with the local communities, and very simply paying them to do safe work, not any dismantling if it's unsafe, clearly no burning or anything like that, just the collection. And then the business model, waste compensation that can ultimately indeed fund a local recycling plant. And I'm quite sure in the next 3 to 5 years, we will have such a plant that would normally be funded by subsidies or an EPR scheme. But we feel that at least on the short term, this concept of waste compensation can fund such at least a small scale plant. And with that, prove that you can indeed also on a longer term move towards an EPR concept, so a more government-led approach to collection and recycling of electronic waste. So it's really, I think, a win-win. If we don't have to ship anymore the waste from Ghana or Cameroon to Europe, that prevent a lot of headaches for us, because you cannot imagine how difficult it is to ship waste from Africa to Europe. But also, if we would recycle the waste locally, it would create much more jobs and opportunities, of course, in those African countries.
So yes, just a comment from my side. I mean, certainly the idea of asking a person to make a small contribution when they purchase a device is a great idea, and we see this type of model being used in online shopping and even in takeaway joints where you get asked a question, will you donate R2 or whatever the case may be. So it's certainly an idea that's gaining traction. from your experience, I mean, generally, I mean, what is the willingness of people to make the contribution? And I'm curious, how much is that contribution, and does that price differ in different places?
Yeah, great question. So I think the willingness is around just about, zero. I think we see that in the whole industry with the whole topic of sustainability, and that's because the pitch is so bad, the proposition is so bad. It is, would you like to spend some money, and then we, any green service can spend it on something that completely is not relevant for you. For example, planting trees in Costa Rica or collecting waste in Africa. And then the customer would say, no, I'm not going to give you money to solve something that is important to you. Why would I pay you for your impact, right? So that's around zero. So we do not sell impact because we're not an NGO. And I don't think, you can really offer something to the general public, which again is such a bad offering as give me money and you will get nothing in return, except for a little bit of a good feeling, perhaps. So what we did is that we changed the concept. I'm not sure if that's the right way to describe it, but I'll try. Change the concept of circularity for tech to make it applicable and relevant for individuals. And we focus currently on B2B, but also to some extent B2C. And there, what we're saying is, give me money and we will create value for you. And that's on 3 levels. First of all, we see organizations that are using tech. That's quite a number of organizations. It's really important for them, and all of their employees use it continuously, in the COVID situation especially. So that's, a fact. And it's also a fact that those organizations are saying, I would like to be more, responsible, or I would like to be more seen as a good employer. I have all of those grand ambitions and visions. But then looking at their tech, which is crucial for any organization, it's silence. There's nothing, because there are no green products, right? So that's a huge market mismatch. Companies are saying tech is essential for my organization. I love tech. My employees, they all love those good devices. But then if I compare that to my company values, it really sucks. So that's an opportunity, helping a organization to make devices that are crucial, a little bit more aligned with company values. That's a proposition that you can sell. And secondly, and I'll stop there doing my pitch, it's about storytelling. Yes, green and circular has a potential of being valuable in storytelling, but again, not if it's really distant and abstract and it's about big topics that are not relevant. So we have the big advantage that we focus on the product that everyone sees and uses every day. We have the advantage that we turn electronic waste into gold. We have the advantage of working on a topic that's mentioned here and there, circularity. But again, we make it really practical, really simple. We use, for example, a term like 1 for 1. And with that, we help companies like T-Mobile and Samsung turn this story into something that they can actually use for marketing and storytelling. And then, the NGOs get really upset because, you're greenwashing and you're doing all bad things. No, we are helping people that are really good at being commercial to use what they're really good at, selling stuff, to create green results. And that's not enough, but it's a great way to get started instead of just beating up the tech industry and telling them they're bad.
Yeah, great. So just to clarify, so the model is not to ask the consumer to pay a bit extra. The idea is that the producer obviously marks up the product or takes a few euros out of the price and then contributes that money across to closing the loop. And you in turn do what you do, and you obviously give them back all their reports and so forth, and they can pull that into their sustainability reporting and so on and so forth. So, okay, I get it. What a pleasure.
Almost. Yeah. 1 second, if I can add. I think the reason why companies pay us isn't because they have to, right? And usually sustainability is something that you do because you have to, unfortunately. Anyone pays us because it's valuable for them. So sometimes it's the end customer because they want a green product. Sometimes it's the reseller because they want a better proposition. Sometimes it's the brand because they want to be better than their competitors. So it's not who pays for the costs, it's who sees value in this. And again, that makes it a different proposition. That's why we talk to the commercial people and not, although I love them, the sustainability people.
No, but it makes a lot of sense. And so perhaps I'm going to hand that back to Chris in a moment, but perhaps so explain the business as you have the income that comes across from those that are willing to contribute to that cost. And then, of course, you use that money in order to create cash flow in the recycling environment. Perhaps just speak a little bit more in practical terms, who gets paid for what and why?
Yeah, great question. And unfortunately, I think it all boils down to that question, right? Who gets paid and what do they get paid to do? Sorry, my answer is always a little bit long, but I'll just add one sentence. I think the reason why we're currently seeing bad things happening isn't because people are, most of them at least, bad, but because they get rewarded for bad things. So as you see, indeed, in local markets, people burning electronic waste, it's not because they have an evil plan to pollute the planet, it's because that's the way that they make money. So using that very simple notion of if you pay for something, then you get something is also what we use. So we pay for the waste, but we only pay if people don't process it or don't treat it in any bad way. So we collect through schools or churches and repair shops, individuals that when they go to their rural village, for example, in the countryside in Ghana, and when they come back to the big cities, they bring the electronic waste. And very simply, we just tell them we pay you this price per device or a price per kilo. That allows them to some extent, do what they did, right? For example, the people that are currently active in the e-waste business to remain their income, but now they get their income from doing something that is not harmful for them and not harmful for them for environment. So we keep it really simple, and the money that we spend is, of course, indeed provided to us by our customers. And indeed, I explained just now that our customers are the tech industry or their customers. And currently we serve those in 8 countries, all in the developed world. And then we spend the money in the emerging markets, if you will.
Yeah, thank you. Chris?
Yeah, I mean, it makes absolute sense. I mean, the reality is that if you look at the current process or modus operandi in any African country with regards to looking at the recycling or recovery of components from electronic waste, it really is largely what we would call a cherry-picking society. So they kind of smash everything up to pull out the valuable components. And so they're pulling out the steel, the aluminium, the copper, and in many cases, the circuit boards that then go to a third-party buyer. But there are then a number of different components that are what we would call the problematic fractions or the lower value fractions, which is often where your hazardous components are. And those then need end-of-life management. So if there's an opportunity to be able to remove that requirement financially to extract the high-value components, it then makes more sense that they can get the same output for less effort without having to destroy the planet. So it's absolutely the way to go forward. Right. So just in terms of the next step, so Joost, what happens then when we look at those other fractions? What is Closing the Loop doing with itself, with its local partners, with its clients in terms of understanding the complexity of those problematic fractions and looking to find solutions for those?
Yeah, great question. And indeed, the cherry-picking topic, you could see that as a challenge within the e-waste industry, but actually the reason, again, why people cherry-pick is because of the financial opportunities it brings them. So let's use that way of thinking, financial opportunities, to indeed incentivize good behavior. That's exactly our approach. So we started with phones because my background is in the telecom industry. And I think we're quite successful there. We've collected now some 3 million devices. But that's not good enough. I think the concept of waste compensation works maybe for any product in any industry, but we definitely think it works for electronics in a broader sense. So what we started off with almost 2 years ago now is to indeed apply the waste compensation concept to the most challenging waste streams. I think we're currently focusing especially on batteries and screens, monitors, because we don't want to be criticized and saying, "Oh, you're doing phones," and it's clear, of course it works for phones. We have a good argument to counter that, but maybe it's even better if we counter it by saying, "Okay, then let's apply it to the most challenging waste streams and prove that it actually also works for those." And that's why we're now teaming up with some of the leading NGOs and think tanks like Oak Institute and GIZ to indeed prove and scale waste compensation so that it, at least on the short term, is a contribution to global e-waste reduction. And with that, move away of saying the market is bad and sustainability is good. No, the market, if you use sustainability in the right way, can actually reinforce sustainability. And I think that's luckily something that more and more researchers and NGOs are also seeing now.
This is another question from my side. I see that you're operating in, I think it was 6 or 7 African countries and now expanding to many others. I mean, just how difficult is it to enter a new market? What does it take to bed yourself down, to engage? Do you have to engage with the authorities? Are there licensing protocols, or are you able to literally go in there, find partners, find interested parties, and set up shop?
Yeah, great question. It's really easy to get started, but to do it responsibly and to really create a solution, both for collection, storage, but especially shipment, extremely difficult. So the approach that we had, and I think the view that we had still applies. We think that this solution is applicable in some 140 countries in the world where e-waste is currently mismanaged. But we also became a little bit more realistic and found that it's extremely difficult for our small size firm to do anything in more than 3 countries. We're just with 8 people here in Europe, and of course our networks are really big in emerging markets. But to manage all of that, you need to be much bigger as an organization. So we focused because otherwise, at some point, you cannot prove to your customers that you're aware of your supply chain, how we collect, if we're compliant, how we ship, etc. So that's one reason. But secondly, you want to make sure that what you collect is funded. And it was mentioned already, the collection rate in Africa is around 4%. It might be even less if you look at just the formal collection. So there's an abundance of waste. You can collect waste, as much as you want. But if you collect waste and not make money, then you'll be gone in a few months. So it needs to be, unfortunately, you could say, demand driven. And in our case, that means that we need to sell the waste compensation service so that we can collect with that money electronic waste. And so our first priority is to scale waste compensation because we're not afraid that we cannot collect enough waste. We're afraid, or at least, again, that's our priority, that you cannot fund that waste collection fast enough. So that's really our biggest priority at the moment.
What a pleasure. And I think it's probably a good place to leave it. So Joost, thank you very much indeed for your contribution. Chris, I'm going to ask you, please, just to give us some final words to summarize your thoughts around e-waste at the various scales as we wrap up this topic. And then that'll bring us to the end of the show. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon, and thank you very much, Joost. I do appreciate your time. Absolutely. So what we've heard over the last 3 shows is that we have a problem. We understand that e-waste is, again, not just your cell phones and your laptops and computers, but it's also your toaster, your iron, the brush cutter you use in your garden. All of these can be represented as electronic waste. And it is a massively, massively increasing component of the waste stream, but it offers solutions. And I think this is where we've spoken to some key people over the last few weeks, understanding where those solutions are and how we can unpack them. So thank goodness for the local recyclers like AST who've gone through those compliance issues and they understand the local component. the work that's being done by the World Resources Forum and the SRI program, but also it's driven by people with passion and a vision like Joost. And he's got a great team at Closing the Loop. They've got huge vision going forward in terms of what they believe they can achieve over the next few years. And they need support. And as he says, working with some of those OEMs, like Samsung, etc., allows one to be able to start to gain traction in this mountain of waste that we're looking at. And we need to support the likes of Closing the Loop and their particular opportunities, and understand that there are solutions in everything. There is no such thing as waste. Circular economy is the way forward. And we look forward to encouraging a sustainable future for all of us. So Joost, absolute pleasure. Thank you very much. I'm really glad you got less hair this time than the last video, because I was feeling really jealous. But great to chat to you. Gordon, thanks. Next week, do you want to give us just a quick spin on there? Joost, hang on the line.
Yeah, thank you. Yep, thank you very much indeed to Chris and to Joost. And ladies and gentlemen, please join us next week, Wednesday, 1 o'clock, same place, same time. This time to talk about packaging waste. We're going to be talking about it at the local scale, the national scale, and the international scale. So be there and get involved. So thank you very much indeed. That's all we got time for. And we're going to play out once again with the video from Closing the Loop. So thanks very much and goodbye.
More than 2 billion phones are produced every year. Only 5 factories can recycle those they replace, but none of these are in Africa. For a continent with an explosive growth of the mobile industry, this creates a serious problem. Millions of phones become obsolete with no way to recycle them. Closing the Loop empowers local partners to actively participate in the value chain. We buy scrap phones and ship them to Europe for proper recycling. Not only does this prevent environmental damage, but it fills a gap in the circular economy, which is about bringing resources back into the value chain instead of to the landfill. We are currently active in more than 10 African countries, from Guinea to Ghana, from Cameroon to Zambia, and we are actively expanding in the region. We support our local partners to help them grow their business and expand their business expertise. With a growing number of partners, we've now collected over 1 million scrap phones, and we've enabled over 2,000 people to financially benefit. Something to celebrate. For example, in Cameroon, our partner achieved a great milestone. But this is just the beginning. We have a long way to go before phones become truly circular. With your help and the help of governments, the public and companies, we can work towards a world we all believe in, a world where waste is not wasted.